Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm joined today by the two founders of brand and content agency Cello, Lindsay Rogers and Tristan Velasco. Guys, welcome to the pod.
Morning.
Hi.
Hello, friends. It's good to have you here. So Cello was founded in 2014. Cello is an independent agency that has worked on award-winning creative projects for clients like Shopify, Uber Eats, My Muscle Chef, Mirvac, Kudos Bank, PwC, Volkswagen, and many, many more. Rocket and Cello have worked together on a range of projects now, including the launch and rollout of Live Mirvac, which featured on the pod a few weeks ago. And we've kind of talked over the last year or so about getting the guys onto the pod. We'll often catch up, and I don't think we disagree on stuff, but I think we have different perspectives. We've kind of got an agency that's much more in the brand, content, creative side of things, and then you've got us nerds sitting over at Rocket, plugging away into the technical digital space that we play of SEO and Google and all those fun things. But I think in many ways we see, marketing in very similar ways, but we have probably very different perspectives on what we see and client challenges. So I think a wide-ranging conversation, brand versus performance, digital versus offline, budgets for creative versus budgets for performance and all those things. But for us, it's just three agency owners coming together to just share what we see working and what's not working in 2023. And hopefully listeners to the pod can kind of garner something out of the conversation. So I thought before we jump into the conversation, Lindsay or Tristan, I'm not sure who's going to take this question, this free hit, but maybe just, talk to us about Cello and what you guys do and where it all started and where it is now.
Thanks, James, and good to be chatting with you. I think at the core of it, we've got similar values and how we, approach brand sort of problems or brand work, and it's great to collaborate. And if anyone hasn't listened to the podcast where you interviewed Jade at Mirvac, definitely worth listening to. At Cello, we do two things. We do branding and deep brand work, so across brand strategy and research into insights, and often with scale-ups that are sort of at an inflection point where they've sort of grown to a certain point in market, proven their market fit, but the brand that has served them to date sort of isn't the right brand to serve them into the future, often with ambitious goals, whether it be new funding or change in market conditions. And the second thing we do is content production and content work. So we produce a lot of campaigns, video, animation, design, copy, all in-house, usually with large global organisations that are localising in the APAC or the Australian, New Zealand sort of space. They're not mutually exclusive. Oftentimes our brand work runs all the way through to content, but as in the Live Mirvac case, where we did a lot of deep and continue to do a lot of deep brand thinking and iterative work all the way through to creative execution. But yeah, when we established in 2014, which means we're 10 next year. You guys are old now. Makes me feel really, really old. I mean, where is the walking stick?
You're all grown up. Well, both of you still look in your 30s, so it's all good. No, sorry, your 20s.
Mildly offensive. Still in
no,
my 30s.
I just messed up my words. I was going to say you look like you're not yet 30, and I stuffed it up. Okay, I knew this would be a fun one. And I guess Tris, your role in the agency.
So creative director, essentially. So I sort of manage everything that comes in, and then sort of, really push the creative team to develop, the work that we do, and essentially what goes out. So Lynn sort of does incoming, I look after outgoing, and it's been sort of great. We're not really specific in the industries that we work with. We're quite diverse, and that has always been, an intentional strategy for us, because there's obviously learnings you can sort of incorporate across industries that sort of help push and shape the work we do better.
Nice. Let's just tackle the hardest and most difficult question first, or topic or theme. I guess brand versus performance. So a lot of the work that you're engaged to do is to take an existing brand and kind of move it and get it out there again, I guess, or it's to take something new into market. Clients will often approach Rocket, which is, I want performance, we need leads, we need them tomorrow. There's obviously a need for both. There's a need for brand development, continuing to invest in brand over many years. Equally, I think would all agree there's a role for performance. So I guess what do you see working best? Like your best clients, the most successful, the work you've been involved with, which has had a great commercial outcome. Like how do clients approach the balancing of the two?
I think in regards to, I mean, as you sort of mentioned, it's always going to be a combination of both. I think the realities for a lot of clients is, the pressures of the numbers and needing to be able to hit those targets on a quarterly, yearly basis. I think quite often it's also because a lack of confidence in the brands, not knowing what story to tell, what narrative to tell, which is, often why, like when we sort of work on brand building projects with clients, they get a new sense of confidence, in regards to how they how they present themselves to market. My Muscle Chef was probably a typical case of that, where they at the time they sort of approached us. They're at a level where they sort of hit the ceiling in regards to their growth. But when we really sort of worked with the research partners to identify the key insights around their audience, which essentially were routine obsessed. They were they had strong routines. And they were well educated in the fitness sort of space. When you sort of go narrow and go deep in regards to who you're targeting and the story that you're going to be telling to those audiences, then you can, you'll turn up in a much more in a different way, and the confidence behind investing in brands becomes heightened. I think it's just a matter of then how do you then sort of tell a connected story from brand through to performance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we were talking about it before we started recording, and this is definitely not Rocket is pushing for performance and Cello's pushing for brand. Like one of my absolute bugbears and frustrations, and it's so hard, is that marketers will come to us and say, good news, I've got all this budget to put into a campaign because the sales team needs leads, or, there's business imperatives, and let's get into market. And, in the next quarter, what do you think is possible? And generally the answer is like the best investment in your marketing is to invest in your brand. And we're actually talking about we were kind of exchanging emails a couple months ago with a mutual client, and was sending over a lot of that research from Binet and Field around the whole 60-40 rule, which is 60% of your marketing budget should be going into brand activity, and 40% should go into your activation, lead gen, performance marketing, whatever you want to call it. And 100%, that's not a fixed rule, right? Like depending on the buyer journey for that particular business, depending on the imperatives of that business. But I definitely feel that there's a massive overweighting towards short-termism and performance. And I probably have the agency that has the vested interest in that, right? But there's no doubt that the most successful performance campaigns that we run are for clients that have historically invested really heavily and continue to invest in brand. And I think often I think the marketers often understand that, but they're not armed with the information to be able to fight that up the food chain.
Yeah, I think all work any marketer is working on should be performance, right? It's sort of that brand building and brand work often takes a bit more time. It's a bit more on the proactive rather than reactive. It's, investing into solid foundations for a 3 to 5 year horizon, or, test and learn iterative approach in a 2-speed format. But I think, that whole idea of sort of brands have invested during downturns over the years. I think it's Ritson that talks about they didn't necessarily see an uptake in the share of voice during the downturn itself, but by continually investing through a downturn at the other end, they exponentially increased because of the salience, and cut through during a downturn. So I think sort of having consistency and having a voice that is bedded in, deep insights, whether it's around audience or category or the need that you're solving, and moving away from just sort of, although features absolutely a part of a funnel, but moving up the chain in terms of the broader benefits and the problem that you're solving, and how what you're delivering, whether it's product or services benefiting society. All of that work, it's longer, it's often more proactive, but over time, those foundations because they're bedded in, whether it's sort of core truths or insights, they absolutely drive performance at the sharper end of the funnel.
Yeah, for sure. Like we the whole 95-5 rule around, and that's a B2B. I think it was Ernberg Bass Institute pumped that out, and I think then LinkedIn's kind of content, B2B kind of content team went heavy on that last year, which is that in a B2B environment, 95% of the market isn't in market at any moment in time. Same in cars, right? Like I think the average, I think it's probably a little bit less now, but it was once every 10 years, someone buys a new car, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that you're only marketing end of financial year sales and whatever else, it's just ridiculous, right? It's why car brands forever and a day have invested in, BMW's marketing to teenagers now, knowing that in 20 years' time, they'll buy a car kind of thing. And we see it like when you're working with, when we're running performance for a brand that is strong, has built, over the years, brand building efforts seriously, we will just get better click-through rates, better conversion rates, better ROAS, all those digital metrics, which you'd kind of think would be pretty consistent, just depending on how well an ad's written or whatever it might be. But it's kind of just not the case.
And I think in regards to that, there are sort of tools that we work with marketers just to really establish, what is the playbook? What are we actually saying? So when you're sort of developing performance ads, it's not just for performance sake. At least it sort of connects to, the benefits for the customer, the value propositions in regards to, the role the brands play. And then ultimately, it's being committed to that message so that, it is, you're turning up in the same way. That might sort of come to life in different ways, but it's ultimately the same message, the same narrative that you're saying. And the stronger that connection from proof points through to value prop there is, the more consistency that you'll get in regards to that brand story overall.
You mentioned Mark Ritson, Lindsay. I don't know if we're on the same webinar, but he did a webinar probably, I think it was about 6 months ago now. And he kind of it was a really interesting point. He was kind of saying that excellent awareness or top of the funnel advertising can create short-term demand, but very rarely can excellent short-term demand, bottom of the funnel advertising create long-term brand benefit, which I thought was kind of an interesting perspective, which very segues nicely into the Airbnb case study, which we're kind of talking about. And that's an interesting one, Linz, if you want to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, most marketers will obviously have be invested in how Airbnb's marketing and brand strategy itself. But an interesting shift over the last few years, they talk really publicly about shifting from a pure performance play into not even brand building. They talk about educating their customers and, they've got sort of 3 different priorities around whether it's getting hosts themselves to be traveling and experiencing more or whatnot. But choosing the route around educating the audience rather than selling to. And we see a lot of this thinking and a lot of sort of the content strategy work that we do around, content pillars and how can we be interesting, useful, unique, differentiated and distinctive based on the solid foundations of a brand strategy, but delivering in new and interesting ways. And over the last couple of years, Airbnb, their owned and earned channels have absolutely skyrocketed. I think I read, they published over 600,000 sort of press articles last year alone. That is just a monstrosity of, of people talking about the brand. But ultimately, great brand building is, the synonyms or the words in which people associate with you. And hopefully from Airbnb's perspective, it's that feeling of belong anywhere, anywhere you go, there's a certain level of expectation, and obviously all their product features reinforce that. But coming back to clear sort of, brand foundations into content strategy, there's a great example and favorite sort of brand of mine called Bedthreads, who I have absolutely no affiliation with, but just really admire their content strategy and their brand from the outside. And they're 100% linen, cotton sheets, and they've since moved into homewares. But what I love about their brand and the pillars, I'm sort of guessing here as to their brand strategy and the way they bring their content to life. But they have a fantastic series of EDMs and a whole part of their website around it's called The Journal. And they explore just really interesting pillars. I think I'd probably typify their core customer. And I do own a fair few of their products because I find it so compelling. So it does lead and drive commercial results because, I'm bought into the stories they tell and the associations they deliver. But, from Airbnb's perspective around educating the customer, I think Bedthreads does a great job at inspiring. I think their content pillars will be around sort of architecture, interiors, lifestyle. They feature recipes and honestly just cool stuff that I kind of want to be either associated with or I want to learn from or I'm inspired by, or even just visually really beautiful. They, great images and great interiors, and they, I would assume they send out their products, napkins, etc., to these sort of ambassadors, I guess, to include them in the shoots they do. But it's just so well curated. It feels like they are inspiring me rather than selling at me. It's led. I've bought not just their bedding products, but then I've they've cross-sold me over into other household items, and it's just such a really clean link from their brand strategy and who they are and how they started as a business through to commercial results. And that middle part there being the really clear content strategy, deeply embedded in inspiration or education in Airbnb's case, that drives me as a customer to tell other people about them and have a really strong few synonyms, and favorable words towards the brand that I think for me is sort of a huge marker of brand success and salience.
It's funny that you described yourself as their ideal customer. I'm also one, and I don't think I've ever mentioned it before. I sit there getting their EDMs, and I'm pretty ruthless with unsubscribing from. So I was a purchaser, and I'm getting content around food and lifestyle from a brand that I bought linen from. And to me, it makes no sense that I would continue to receive the content, but I love it and it's awesome. It's really funny that you said.
And how many EDMs can you say, hand on heart, that you love getting, and when they're in your inbox, there's that, and then there's a trend one by Wunderman Thompson, another agency group. They do a trend insight one. I can just never bring myself to delete. I have to read every email because it's such insightful, interesting, curated content that's really useful. You feel like you're learning or you're inspired or you want to send it on to someone. And I think if you can keep those really tangible, those feelings as a consumer and translate them then, from a marketer's perspective into actionable items on behalf of your own organization, that's really compelling.
Yeah, that's right. And it, like all of the studies show that brands that are the value of a strong brand is that you can charge a higher price. You'll close your deals quicker. From the brands that don't, that aren't in market, that people aren't thinking of. And when it comes to the next time to purchase in that category, the likelihood of doing so with them is so much higher. Do you guys want to ask me some questions? You said you were going to flip it around at me at some point and play podcast host.
What is the hardest thing about when you're working with marketers from a performance perspective? What's the hardest thing or the shift that you try to make most often when it comes to long-termism and short-termism? What is it? What's the journey that you find yourselves on constantly?
Starting from that top level, right, which is what percentage of my marketing what percentage of my revenue should I spend on marketing? And there's kind of rules of thumbs on that. Is it 10 to 13% on average? But obviously, if you're in, small professional services, you're probably spending much less. And if you're in FMCG, you're probably spending more. Okay, let's agree on that to start with. Then what percentage should we be spending on activities which are going to be really valuable longer term, build our brand, do all those great things, versus what percentage should we be spending on making sales, generating leads? Now, obviously, every business person, every marketer would happily just sit there generating more leads and more sales, but it's not how the world works. So, probably looking at that 60-40 rule, 70-30, how does it work? From that, what should go into digital and what should go into offline, above the line type activity? I think it'd be good for us to talk about that maybe after this, because you guys have and you're not a media agency, but I think you probably have more exposure to kind of those types of decisions. We sometimes, depending on the size of the business we're working with, some of our smaller clients, we're kind of we're much more involved in all those discussions. But if we're dealing with a much bigger client, then they'll come to us and say, we've got this budget for search or social or whatever it might be. How do we best kind of deploy it? So, in that instance, if someone comes to us and, we work with some household brands, right? And they'll come to us and say, here's a Google Ads budget. The brand stuff is already happening. There's TV ads happening. There's backup bus. And so in that instance, it is probably more of a technical discussion, Lindsay. It probably is more, we're looking at your Google Ads instance and it's dog's breakfast, or it's actually being run really, really well. And then it is probably more technical in nature as to kind of the recommendations. But I think probably where that question was coming from is more when it is, we're seeding to rocket our digital marketing for the next 12 months. And these are our goals, and kind of go off and do it. And it is often an education process of the conversation that we're having now, right? Which is to say, you don't have the cut through, or you don't have the brand that, that your competitors do. And you need to be investing in sensible long-term activities, and they still should be measured, but measured probably with different metrics. And so it is about, like, SEO for us is the studies, pretty much every study on SEO shows that it's a higher quality visitor than through paid search. So the obvious thing is, I want traffic, I want it tomorrow, I want leads, buy.
Yeah.
But our clients that have consistently invested in organic, and to do that generally, it's the equivalent of brand building versus demand gen. You're basically saying, I'm willing to invest now for things that won't happen for 12 months, 24, 36. And that's not to say you won't get green shoots and potentially a return on investment sooner, but it's an investment in the future. So you're kind of having to build that story as well. Like, most traffic goes to SEO. I think it's around 70% of traffic that gets moved around to Australian businesses each day is happening through Google organic, right? Google search is like 10%, if that. Social is really, really small. Then you get kind of direct. So if you actually want to move volume, you're doing it through SEO, but that's an investment in the future. And it's also a leap of faith, because if you get it wrong, you never get it. And then things like email marketing, Lindsay, like that's the example you just described. Like it is an awesome tool to generate return on investment. And generally it is the most cost-effective channel to drive ROI is through email marketing. But to actually generate your database and to have them bought in and nurtured is an investment in time and in content, whatever else. And then within you kind of probably what are viewed as more performance channels like Google search, paid search, paid social. Even within that, often we're trying to re-educate customers now that, if you're B2B and you're in LinkedIn running paid ads, you can't really judge it through MQLs, SQLs, opportunities opened, unless you're in a really transactional space. Like if you're in B2B SaaS, or you're trying to sell managed IT services, it's about generating eyeballs, impressions, clicks, downloads of a white paper to then be nurtured. So it's probably really similar themes, right? And it's a bit art and it's a bit science, right? Because it depends on the client, depends on where they're at. Like if you're dealing with someone that's quite sophisticated, they've been doing this for 5 years, doing it quite well, it's a different conversation to someone that's coming into a business that's needing to scale and has these kind of very strong, plans as to where they need to get to. And often it's about kind of setting expectation properly.
What about in a downturn? How much are you diagnosing the sort of the path forward versus, clients having a plan themselves? And specifically during an economic downturn, what channels or ways of working do you find to have been most effective?
Yeah. We, when COVID first hit, we were kind of like lots of businesses were freaking out. It was kind of, it's going to be a recession. How do we plan for this? How do we, for ourselves, but also for our clients? And we published at the time, I think it was really good and it still is good. It was kind of the recession marketing manifesto, I think. And we looked at a lot of research around, because Australia hadn't had a recession, since the early 90s. So there's very little, there's nothing in terms of digital in Australia to really look to lean on, but also very little in Australia for a long period. So a lot of the research, and you touched on it before, Linz, was basically saying brands that cut their marketing budgets in poor economic conditions come out of recessions tremendously worse than those that hold firm. So it's not self-serving marketing stuff. It's actual like Harvard Business Review studies, academic papers coming out of Europe. And the reason being is that it's what most people do. They cut their budgets. But if you hold firm and you continue to invest in brand and being in, you know, in the mind of your potential customers, that when inevitably things pick up, all the benefits of brand building are there. And I think one of the really interesting case studies was Toyota. Like Toyota's growth in America was like largely put down to what them continuing to invest in the early 70s when there was some huge downturn in auto. They kept investing, and the car buyer journey is, you know, a long one. So all these brands are pulling out, but no one would have bought the cars anyway. But I think as it relates to digital, it's also at the moment very sector driven. Like there's certain sectors that, you know, are so decimated that it's hard to make an argument that you should invest in either if literally you're, you know, on the verge of insolvency. But for brands that are kind of right sizing in tough sectors, it's about them. Well, okay, the pie's a little bit smaller for marketing. If your performance channels are working, then obviously you want to keep driving those channels forward. But a lot of the digital kind of thought in that kind of instance is, if your performance is not going as well as it was, you might shake that down, but you should continue to be investing in your SEO, your content strategy, email marketing, because whether it's 6 months or 12 or 18, things change, right? And you don't want to be the brand that cut everything and then you're starting from scratch then.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of duality that, I mean, our customers, as in that work with you guys and work with us, are similar senior marketers that have really great depth of knowledge around their product or service and marketing, right? As a prerequisite. But the kind of duality between grit and flexibility, I find really interesting. So what you just talked about there around grit during hard times and in continually investing. And ultimately, if your competitors are pulling away, your media spend should go further, and, you know, there should be more opportunity for you to fly higher post downturn. But at the same time, you know, us and you talk a lot about iterative approach to creative, say, like, let's test and learn and see from a campaign perspective what's working. And then, you know, Jade talked about this on your interview with her, then drilling down, and often quite surprisingly that the grammar in an ad works really well for a younger audience, you know, things that we don't expect, and being flexible enough to follow the insights. I just find that kind of the duality interesting in terms of what makes a great marketer for us, you know, for agencies to work with, is somewhere in the middle, grit and focus, and, you know, in a brand, from a brand perspective, going deep and really saying no to everything that is not, you know, part of the brand DNA, but at the same time having the flexibility to learn and respond to whether it's market conditions like COVID or iterative approach to creative. And somewhere in the middle there's that sort of utopia, and if only there was a handbook every time.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the grit or the confidence or personality to just continue to push back to stakeholders in the organization that don't get it, arming yourself with data and science and academic studies and whatever it might be, to kind of say, you know,
this isn't just my perspective.
This isn't my perspective. And of course, we all want sales tomorrow, but the reality is, you know, roughly, I should have a budget that's roughly this percentage of our revenue. And here's, you know, the innumerable studies that prove that, you know, businesses spend between X and Y on marketing. Then from that, this is where it should be apportioned roughly 70-30, 60-40, depending on where you're at. But then I think it's actually having kind of the flexibility or the acumen or whatever it might be to go, well, yeah, the way that I'm then spending that money makes sense, and having the foresight to invest in the long-term stuff that you have the confidence in, but then change the short-term stuff that, you know.
We have an archetype, sorry, Tris, very quickly. We have an archetype at Cello where we talk about an optimistic challenger, and it's exactly that. People that view things as an exciting opportunity, marketers that view things as an exciting opportunity, but are willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and get involved in the challenge. Tris?
And I was just going to add, I think it's also the ongoing partnership between the various parties. So, for example, partnership with the clients, partnership with the media agencies and the creative agencies, and having, regular touch points in regards to where feeding back, the performance of the creative, so that we can continually iterate and use those sort of insights to be able to develop new ideas that develop even stronger cut through, and the client being very much a part of that, so that there's a constant alignment throughout. And it also keeps all of us accountable as well. And I think that's the important thing. Like, it's not just us handing over the creative to media, it's making sure what we're saying, how we're sort of bringing it to life is actually working as well.
And to that point, how, okay, given my background, if a client comes to me and says, I've got this much budget, we can kind of look at where they're currently at. And we're very strong at knowing where that budget should go. Should it go into Facebook or LinkedIn or Google search or SEO? When you're working with media agencies that are doing above the line and below the line, like, how do you work together to best work out decisions around where the creative, like, is it chicken and, like, it's, to me, it's also a bit chicken and the egg. Like, how do you know what creative to be working on without knowing, you know, what the budget is? Is it going to be TV, radio? Like, how does that all kind of come together?
Well, I think the ultimately, when it comes to media, it's budget. Like, I think that's going to then determine, you know, the channels in which you can play.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there is, you know, a strong argument to play in a certain channel, then, you know, it's a conversation with a client in regards to, you know, how do you shift budgets around to make this work. I think another consideration is the creative idea. In regards to, you know, there is an idea that's definitely going to get cut through. We feel, you know, all confident it's going to get cut through, and it needs to be in certain sort of channels to get that cut through. But, you know, I think, I mean, whilst we can sort of collaborate with the media agencies and the clients in regards to, you know, our perspective, we do also lean on media agencies to provide their experience and expertise, because like, as we sort of mentioned earlier, you know, having the network of agencies that have sort of deep expertise in their area, and how do those agencies then collaborate with each other to add value at certain touch points is, I mean, where we like to sort of play.
Yeah. And that's very much the live example, right? Where the decision was it's going to be digital first for a range of different reasons. And then I remember, like, that you and myself, Tristan, with Jade and members of both of our teams, actually then sitting down literally around a table, working out which channels that, you know, based on our experience, would be going into the type of creative that you guys were kind of thinking, and then also the commercial imperatives of the client. And that's obviously worked well. And then this is one I always am fascinated by, and something you guys can answer much better than I can. How much should I be spending to create my creative? And then how much should I be spending on amplifying it? And you're not allowed to say 95% to create it and 5% to amplify it.
I mean, we typically work off a, you know, 70-30, 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
So 70-30, 20-80 rule. You know, there's no point sort of developing amazing creative if it's not going to be seen. And I think that's very much at a brand level. But then, you know, what we like to do is then empower clients to have, as I sort of mentioned before, tools to make sure that sort of creative goes further. And it's simple, like, it could be as simple as just developing a messaging framework. You know, what are your key value propositions? And then you're sort of using that at a sort of top of funnel layer, and then support that by benefits and proof points as you sort of work through the funnel. But then at least, you know, whilst we sort of can sort of develop big sort of brand creative in the first instance, at least when you're sort of developing, you know, creative and communications ongoing, you're essentially, you know, really drilling down, you know, the narrative that you want to control, and have those conversations with the prospective audiences.
And is that kind of an ongoing 70-30, 80-20, whatever it might be? Like, if someone comes to you for a huge amount of brand work, relaunching, reworking an entire brand, et cetera, or coming into a new market or something like that, like, is it fair to assume that maybe the percentage, does it change? And then once you're kind of in market, a little bit more BAU type activity, does it drop down, or does it kind of continually?
That's a typical sort of budget ratios we work with for go-to markets.
Yeah.
But then in regards to an ongoing sort of budget split, It's knowing what their marketing budget is for the year, and how to then, how do we start to think about developing a content strategy in regards to, focusing on, for example, organic channels, to be able to sort of, develop ongoing contents in a more effective way. But that's, that's always going to be contextual.
Yeah.
There's a set rule based on that.
I think on that note too, it depends what category, are you B2B, are you B2C? Is it a big consumer campaign? It's a very different conversation to a hyper-targeted B2B piece of work. Often we think of the brand work as in the brand strategy and the deep thinking separate to campaign budgets or separate piece of work, because it should be lasting an organization 3 to 5 to 7 years, depending what sector they're in and how fast it's moving and changing. But it should be deep work that's done well, that's built in research and insights, that can then last multiple iterations of campaigns or approaches to different audience sectors. So we sort of separate the two out, and a huge trend that I'm loving watch unfold, and I've been a huge advocate of this for years, is B2C thinking in the B2B space, and watching organisations like Salesforce and many others take a real consumer focus to B2B marketing. And what I mean by that is the depth and the quality of that storytelling, instead of B2B kind of, poor second cousin and here's a leaflet, poorly printed, into really clever, sharp and higher production values. Because at the end of the day, even B2B decision makers are people, and we all we want to be inspired and educated and shared with, as opposed to sort of second best. So I think there's a huge shift that way, and often that comes back to the core strategy. What is it that we're trying to do, and how is it distinctive from any other competitor in the space? Yeah,
that's it. And I think that kind of connects back to the start of our conversation. I was reading an article recently, and it was kind of, the premise was that has there been an overreach in terms of money being moved into performance, into digital, into search, where you look at the kind of the graph over the last 15 years of the increase of budgets into digital, particularly in kind of search type activity, and away from things like TV and radio and whatever else. And the article was looking at how the tech platforms and tech companies themselves, how their approach to marketing has changed over that time. And back in the day, a lot of them didn't do a lot of marketing, then started to, but it was very digital. And even like your big SaaS businesses were doing a lot of performance digital, but not much else. And now you look at it and it's, you're at the airport and it's Monday.com and Asana ads and, Salesforce, sponsoring stadiums and, the new building looking over Circular Quay. And they themselves are, first of all, taking that longer term brand building stuff, but then to your point, Lindsay, then marketing in a way that is kind of B2H rather than B2B.
One really interesting example of that is Birchal, the sort of crowdfunding platform. I see a lot of, just from a consumer perspective, see a lot of ads on my Instagram stories for organisations that are raising money via Birchal. And it's often two founders sort of saying, hey, this is the business we've built, we've got great traction. And it's essentially like a mini VC pitch for money in my Instagram stories. That's a really interesting intersection of, commercial B2B thinking, but taking a sort of traditionally more consumer platform and, telling that story in a way that is more consumery by way of showcasing the products. And so I think that intersection is really interesting, where people are going, well, ultimately, just where are the people we want to talk to? How do we adapt to that channel? Even if we traditionally haven't played in that space or our competitors don't, let's use that to our advantage rather than steering away from.
Yeah. Right message to the right person at the right time.
101.
More questions. Are you gonna throw any questions at me? You threatened to kind of keep me on my toes.
You sort of mentioned earlier in regards to, it's a follow-up question from Lindsay's question in regards to, trying to sort of address the barriers around brand versus performance when having those conversations with clients. I mean, what are the things that you've experienced that help them sort of get across those barriers in regards to, what is the ideal client? I mean, what are the clients that you love working with that sort of understand in the balance between brand and performance?
Yeah. I think first of all, fundamentally understanding the role of each, to actually understand that without a strong brand that is recognized in a particular market, that has goodwill, has all those things, it's going to make everything else much harder. Having a client who themselves can fight battles internally is super important. It is really frustrating when you can convince someone of something or they know it, but they themselves are unwilling or incapable of actually fighting the good fight internally, because it's kind of their job, right? Like if it's kind of without spoiler, the last question you're going to be asked is, what career advice would you give to an in-house marketer? And often it is, follow the money, or talk money, talk revenue. And it kind of ties into that. It's like, if you can't make strong, rational arguments internally about why, you haven't got enough money, or there's too much pressure being put on too immediate a return, and why that's the detriment of the business in the long term, then it gets very, very frustrating. Or, I guess the third point there, Tris, is just a marketer who doesn't actually believe any of that stuff and just thinks that everything should be performance-driven, ROI-driven, dollar in, dollar out, be able to scale media budgets and keep ROAS and CPLs in check. And you kind of need to have that flexibility and openness to know that's not the case.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's the same with us. I mean, we sort of like to sort of think about our clients. I mean, the amazing clients, there's optimistic challenges, and they will fight the good fights because they believe it will essentially be the greater good of the business. And then it's on us as agencies to then equip them, with the right information, the right tools, to be able to, provide that back to their internal teams.
And I think as you get older and have been in business for long enough, I think you get better at pushing back on clients as well, in terms of, like, it's our, as you kind of touched on, it's our job. We're the experts in our respective fields, and we're not doing our client we're not doing right by our client if we're being an order taker and we're told, spend this budget here, or I need this then, or I need it now. It's about saying, well, it's our expert opinion that that's the wrong way of doing it, or you're setting yourself up to fail. So I think a good agency, good contacts in an agency will also help you, right? Will push back and say you're wrong, and then I think it's on you to agree or disagree, and then to do with that information what you can.
And that's how we're going to be able to provide the best value, having that external perspective as well, because I think, it's easy within an organization to be guarded but by the four walls that you sort of live in. You kind of need to rely on that external perspective.
You can't read the label from inside the bottle.
Exactly.
And conversely, like we have a client that essentially pays us a bunch of money each month for our best ideas. And how empowering that is, both from their perspective and from ours, for them to be getting the most value out of their creative agency to produce the best ideas. And from our perspective, hand on heart, what are the best, most out of the box things that an organization can be doing? And then if we all agree that it's aligned to the broader strategy, and we feel like it's going to drive business results, like maybe this, other things to consider outside of the briefs that had been written. Maybe there's kind of new ideas and creative ways of thinking about problem solving. And that is a win-win for everyone. It gets the best out of us. Plus we get really bought in and excited to the opportunities with the brand above and beyond the here and now.
Sounds like a great way to kind of engage an agency, right? Engagement in the true sense of being engaged. Yeah.
It's built on trusted foundations. In that case, it's a marketer that we've worked with over many businesses. So that proven trust, I think it takes two to tango. It's a great relationship, and I think we produce great results for the organization and for their team because they're empowering, and it's a win-win. And I think that symbiotic relationship over time is find your agencies and love them hard from a marketer perspective, because we will ultimately be going the extra mile for those that we feel bought into.
Yeah, it's just, and it's so true. You speak to every agency owner, and it's like you always go that extra mile for the clients you like, and then and then I think there's this perception that beat your agency up and get the most out of them, and it just doesn't. It's not how it works. But
which fortunately we don't see too much of that these days. I think a modern way of working is much more just kind of, it's probably built off the product attributes of things like Airbnb and Uber, where you are rating each other really visibly. That whole idea of just don't be a crappy person, like just be a good person, turn up, do great work, treat each other with respect, and everyone gets just better work and better results from it. Also, it means when times are tough, we're at the coalface with clients. We are absolutely going the extra mile to help them out of tricky, sticky, hard situations, because we're bought in. We feel like we really are an extension of the team, not just, I don't know, being a hand that's moved by the big bad client.
Yeah, that's it. Could not agree more. Guys, I'm going to ask you the closing question. You've been pre-warned. What's the best piece of career advice that you would give to an in-house marketer?
You go, Linz, first.
Nice one, Tristan. Buys himself an extra 30 seconds.
On a personal level, I've always lived by, you've got to be in it to win it. So giving things a go, and, if your gut's telling you to do it, go with it. I think on a sort of professional and marketing, internal marketing, senior marketer perspective, I'd say find your agencies, your trusted relationship, and just love them hard. The benefits of a really great relationship with an agency is 1 + 1 = 3. We want to go the extra mile, and the work is better for it. So I think, over time, whoever those people are for you, stick with them and nurture those relationships.
Good one.
I think for me, it's all about, it's essentially building on what Lindsay said. I think true partnerships are built on, just sharing information. I think just sharing, the challenges, what you've got with us as a creative agency just gives us more context in what we've got to work with. Because quite often, we don't want to be sort of developing presentations that, don't really consider the various components that we need to consider. Like the more that they share, the stronger the creative thinking is going to be, because ultimately we're trying to solve problems, and handing those sort of considerations to us allows us to solve those problems in better ways.
Love it.
What about
guys?
you, James? What's yours?
I'm on the firing line here.
You did say you wanted us to keep you on your toes.
It's true. I'm just going to rip. I just think follow the money. I just think if you genuinely just keep going up, and how are the things that I'm working on actually helping my business, and how am I helping my board or my CEO and my head of revenue to make more money for the business in the right way, then you're going to be a good marketer. And my other one would be just actually understand the market. So I think maybe one from a more of a career perspective, and then one from an actually doing your job. Take lots of time and effort to truly understand the market you're trying to play within, and what your product or service can do to that market.
Brilliant.
End of the pod. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, James.
Really good to chat, James.